For Lin, the idea was horror music that wasn't cliché. No screeching, Herman-esque strings or deep rumbling synth bass. As a result, the texture of Lin is a mixture of the orchestral, instrumental, and the synthetic. This is due, and at least in part, to the software I was using, which wasn't particularly advanced, particularly with regards to sample sets. I wrote 20 tracks in total for Lin, ranging from the cheerful to the ominous. The astute listener may notice a recurring theme. This is in some ways the main theme of Lin, and it appears in several tracks in several settings, from the dark to the warm, to the exciting. This theme is slow and meant in its original incarnation to be disconcerting, but it was molded to many uses as I composed. Another minor motif that popped up in a number of tracks was the descent motif, 3 descending notes. It initially appears in The Forest by the Countryside, the opening music, but later recurs in Fight and Chase and opens the last piece of music before the ending credits. Scoring the film was very difficult, as Dataman, the director, was very particular and strict.
I guess I was, yet I have to be when making a horror movie. Especially a low-budget production, it's all about atmosphere, which is all about the music and scenery equally. I really appreciate how patient Terry was with the constant changes though. Believe me, it's hard to listen to a decent track to just go on and complain about it.
I admit it did test my patience sometimes, but for the most part, Dataman's requests were reasonable and improved the tracks to complement the scenes better. The first track I composed was The Forest by the Countryside, which opens the film. The idea behind this was a calm opening to complement the blue sky and the forest, so I composed a friendly, slow, almost melancholy piece for acoustic guitar. A synth choir joins in later on. Finally, as the day darkens and the main protagonist arrives, the main theme of Lin is introduced, the choir descends and low horns herald his coming. It's a telling sign for how our protagonist acts and how the movie progresses.
Terry did a great job on this, considering it was the first track he made for the movie and his gear got changed along the way. It still holds up well and makes for a strong beginning.
The feel of the opening theme was brought back for Time Passes, which plays over images of day and night passing, while the protagonist is passed out drunk. In addition to the acoustic guitar, a flute was added in. As with many other tracks, the main theme appears here. It was actually a very long track, 2 minutes, which in retrospect is somewhat astonishing. For the photograph scene, I composed a light, melancholy heart melody which accompanied the visuals along with sound effects matching the images on screen. The sound effects were cheering, waves, and, I think, the chirping of birds.
Here's one of the strangest moments during the whole production. Terry had an idea to add happy birthday music to play on one of the photographs, while the ambient and the actual music track were still playing. It was messy and confusing. I guess these moments happen to the best of us.
Oh yes, that was something of an embarrassing moment. I can't believe I thought that was a good idea. One pivotal scene in the film is when the book of photographs is burned. This required 2 tries to get right, the first one having some largely unnecessary and highly dissonant strings. The second try removed them and added a little bit of horn to fill the space. The track opens with synth, a triangle wave, and we used Dataman's voice for some Latin to create a very disconcerting effect. The result was a tense, understated piece, the synth hanging around the entire instrumental portion of the track. The main theme appears again, played in ominous fashion by synth flute. Dataman did some really neat editing to it, which made it very disconcerting.
About the editing, I actually reversed the track and it sounded just as good that way. The only difference was that it made the whispers hard to comprehend, which actually was a good change since they have quite a limited meaning anyway. I recall translating to Latin something like "The joyful days of the past are gone forever and will never come back, burn it away, cleansing fire," and some names. For some reason, I love whispers in horror music. They have some sort of genuinity and rawness to them.
So that's what you did. It sounded a bit like that. I also contributed a couple whispers, but I don't think for that track. My whispers were less forceful and quieter in nature. Mine weren't in any particular language, but had a sort of Latin feeling to them. The track after that was For the Dream. This track was entirely synth and timpani, and some of it was meant to be used for afterwards, but instead a new track was composed for it. As it turns out, much of this track was too long, so only some of it was used. The new track, The Calm After the Nightmare, is actually one of my favorites of all that I composed. If I were to compose the film all over again, I don't think I'd change anything about this track other than the instrumentation. For the first appearance of Matt, I composed a track for the samurai movie he was watching. This track is surprisingly good, considering that I composed this with the intent in mind of music that's entirely unoriginal. Some of the ideas in this track returned entirely by accident later on in the last track with him and Ruby, which isn't entirely a bad thing, I think.
This was basically a character building scene without the character actually doing much. His personality is reflected by the movies he likes, the way he dresses, and only after a while from his attitude and interactions with his daughter. This scene was intended to be really cliché, and for that, the track works very well. Since this scene was purposed to be a worse movie inside the actual movie, I dropped all of my quality control senses while describing what I was looking for. There was only one redo, and that was due to having the action start later, to make way for a cheesy monologue. Gotta have those.
As though to compound upon how low budget the samurai movie is meant to be, I think my track actually has a couple moments where it doesn't even match the actions on screen. An unexpected moment of serendipity, I think. The next couple of tracks in the film were more ambient ones. Through the forest layered strings and synth to a very neat effect, and some disconcerting synth played melody opposite that. The main theme even got a look in. Two versions were prepared, one without any sound effects and one with wind and bird chirping effects on it. In the end, the version with SFX was used. After that was the quieter Wandering in the Swamp. For this one, the harmony was played by synth and a sitar sample played very low and quiet, along with a very swift FM synth bass, which added a lot of tension to the track.
My personal favorite from the soundtrack is Wandering in the Swamp. It just works.
Yeah, your reaction to this was one I didn't quite expect, but I was very happy with it. I think it's alright myself, but it's not my favorite. After Wandering in the Swamp was a more ominous track, timpani combined with a piano cymbal pitched to several octaves down to sound like a synth. Surrounding this and giving it atmosphere was a shimmering, oppressive synth that grew in layers as the track progressed in some quiet cello. Some whisperings of mine were used for this track, which gave it a unique atmosphere. The track came to a climax with more synth releasing at the sound of bird wings flapping. The next two tracks were particularly difficult. Firstly was the Angel Shatters, which went through many incarnations. The first was a bunch of synth playing a single note and then pitch bending down over an octave. The next several incarnations of this were trying to achieve the effect of an orchestra behind the glass, as it were, getting louder as cracks appeared. This one was difficult due to my poor instrument synth/samples. Finally, it was replaced with an organ. Later, it turned out, due to the way scenes were working out, that I'd have to compose a new track for it.
Yeah, that was one of the most embarrassing moments for me.
The new track is actually one of my favorites, due to its blend of analog synth with organ, which gave it a very unique flavor, one which I may come back to in future projects. Sadly, a lot of it wasn't used. The movie began to come to a climax. fight and chase accompanied Tommy's declaration to kill Lynn once and for all, ominously building up and following the action, giving the scene tension and excitement in so much as a synthetic orchestra could. The main theme of Lynn appeared here as well, slightly different to up the excitement, accompanying the fight along with heavy percussion. The chase, on the other hand, had heavier percussion yet, along with some very fast brass and strings. My music accompanying Tommy's death was, alas, not used, which is a shame because it's one of my favorite tracks out of those I composed for the film, but ultimately I suppose it was too dramatic and had too full a sound for the loneliness of the scene.
The music made for Tommy's death wasn't used that much, it was still spliced in here and there, because it didn't go that well with the feeling of isolation and loss. The instrumental aspect was well made, but it was still a bit too much for the scene's emotional accompaniment. I didn't ask for rewrite since I knew in advance that in this case I'd be insanely nitpicky and painful to work with. I just took other parts of other tracks and sound files from bells and triangles and stuff to make the scene go like it did.
This track, like Fight and Chase, utilized a pizzicato bass sound which I had grown fond of. This track, along with a ghostly synth, an organ, and a classic analog sawtooth wave, played most of the music. We had snare drum join in when necessary. The same motif introducing Lynn in Fight and Chase was brought back to reinforce its connection to her. The greater synth usage was very much intentional as I was trying to get away from the fake sound of my old synths and samples. The main theme of Lynn does not appear during this track or any of the later tracks. As much as it is the main theme of the movie, it is also a theme that accompanies Tommy's story, and with his strength deserting him and Lynn finally destroying him and killing the person he once was, so does the theme disappear. The blood transitions into a night sky, and the descent motif which introduced the film appears again, this time from Matt and Ruby arriving. It doesn't last long and moves into light, happy music that meanders vaguely along, following ever so vaguely what they're doing. Background music. For Ruby's descent down the hill and the transformation of Tommy into something very other, I went with dark, low music, almost funeral in atmosphere. It's low, dark, and ominous, and ends when Ruby's face finally comes into view after the darkness that accompanies Tommy's initial words. Until the ending credits, that is the last of my music. The ending credits themselves are a simple affair of synth, bass, organ, and percussion, with each section of the music following along with the visuals and the character. Thus, for Tommy, we get the descent motif. For the appearance of Lynn, once again, the appearance motif from Fight and Chase and Tommy's death comes back. Just after her credit appears, those fast 16th notes followed by the full ominous chord when she appears. For Matt, the ominous rising synth resolves into a happy descent before darkening, accompanying the visuals of his death. For Ruby, something simple and childlike, but which darkens with the screenshots shown. For the composer credits, an ominous intro before going into an odd piece that can't quite decide what it wants to be. For Dataman's credit, I used a simple text-to-music note system and turned his name into music notes. Finally, for the Troceleng logo, I used the Troceleng jingle, reiterated for organ. Thus ended Lynn.
The ending credits were probably the most freedom Terry took, and it worked well. I was thinking about the darker, more menacing track, but in retrospect that would have clashed with the still shots accompanying the credits. I cut the track once and added in a part of the track that played before to better differentiate the actors and actresses from the crew.
With the advantage of retrospect, there's a lot I would have done differently. A lot of my music was cut or spliced together due to the way the film was made and the editing that occurred. If I were to recompose the film entirely, I think I'd try and use the textures and sounds of the last few tracks more throughout the movie to give it a more consistent musical color. Or maybe I'd go for a more orchestral instrumental vein, but Well, the past is the past. I learned a lot while writing the music of Lynn, and I think I'm a better composer now than when I first composed The Forest in the Countryside. I will be releasing this soundtrack on Bandcamp completely free, and I'm also uploading a few tracks to my SoundCloud account. Both links are in the description.
It was great working with Terry. He was patient, fast-working and very adaptive, considering all the stuff I had him redo and edit, not to mention the limited knowledge he had to work with when I didn't have the video track ready for a scene at times. The next movie will certainly be a change of pace. It will be an action comedy. Sort of like the movie you see in this movie, but it takes itself far more seriously. It will definitely be more funny than that. And also, quite a lot more light-hearted than Lynn, Forest of Hatred. If you love this movie, yes, make sure to listen to the composer's cut of the soundtrack.
I hope you, the viewer and listener, enjoyed my music and felt it suitably enhanced the movie's visuals. I also hope you keep an ear out for my music in future projects of Dataman which I'll be scoring. Personally, I'm looking forward to a change of pace, so keep an ear out. Also, please check out my blog, which includes a contact form if you want to get in touch with me. The link is in the description. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about music. I suspect this will not be the last time I do this, so keep an eye and an ear out. Bye!